I can really recommend being a foster carer for Notts County Council. There's always someone walking the journey alongside you, whether that's other foster carers or social workers. It really helps to provide stability and consistency for children who really need it, and that's really rewarding as a foster carer.
Roger and I have been fostering for 35 years. We do deal with challenges, but to say we've been doing it for 35 years to me proves that it's not impossible. We learn an awful lot from these young people, and even now we're still learning.
As a foster family, we care, we want to make a difference, and we get so much fulfilment from fostering. The satisfaction of making a difference is something that money can't buy. Just seeing the smiles on the children's faces and helping them reach their potential is wonderful.
We work as family workers within the fostering service for Nottinghamshire County Council.
I really enjoy my work. I really enjoy meeting lots of different foster carers.
You know, we get to know the families, we get to know the kids, and we care, basically. It's important as it is to them that the kids are getting the support that they need.
A lot of people said to me they would like to be a foster carer, but there's something stopping them. I had that as well. And we decided just to jump in and do it and see what happened. And for us, it's been the best decision we've ever made.
It's been a fantastic decision, it really has, yes.
Once people start to become a foster carer and take that leap to do it, they'll understand how much it gives back, not just to the child, but how much it empowers you as well.
I'm Leon, I'm a care leaver, and I've been in care since I was 8. I've been with the same parents since, and they're amazing. They are my foster parents, but I do class them as my parents, my mum and dad. All a child wants really from a family is to be supported, loved and cared for, and know they're there because they're wanted. From personal experience, I know the difference it's made for my life.
We always say that we foster as a whole family. It's not just us who are the carers, our children are involved in that. And even now, people express concern about the effect on our birth children of foster caring. I think we need to kind of get past that and dispel that myth, because actually the overall effect on our children, I think, is positive. They're learning new skills, they're gaining empathy, they're interacting with children from different backgrounds. For a long time we didn't make use of support care, and we wanted our child to settle into our placement and not feel pushed out, but it's actually been really helpful for us to start to have support care.
We've known Zoe for a number of years, and it's meant that we got to know her foster child. So for her it's been like coming for a sleepover rather than a feeling she's coming to another family. I got into fostering for Notts County Council, and it was something that I've always wanted to do, but working full time and my husband also working full time, we thought it's not really going to be something we can do now. But after looking at the website, we realised there was this wonderful thing called support care that we were able to offer. It might surprise you, but actually I'm under 30, I don't have any children of my own, and that doesn't stop you from being a foster carer.
I think some people don't go into foster care because they think it's going to be really costly to have another child living in their house, but actually the fostering allowance is generous enough to cover all the costs of having a child living with you.
We have a lot of fun on the weekends when we have foster children in. We get to go to parks, ice skating, children's events, trampolining parks like I Jump.
We get access to the Max card, which is a discount card for foster carers and their children to access different local amenities. Also recently we went on holiday and we were able to use the Max card to get free access to some castles and historical places because it's a national initiative.
We chose to go with Notts County Council because of the support care that was offered and the training. And it's always local to Nottinghamshire. My parents are foster carers for an agency and they found it really difficult to get support care for their child.
My name's Lynn. I am now a support foster carer. We were mainstream carers, but given our ages, we felt that we couldn't commit to children for long term anymore. We just find it really rewarding, the relationships we build up with these young people, and we feel we're perhaps a bit like grandparents to them. With the children coming here for weekends, this enables their mainstream carers to have a break, and this makes things more secure perhaps for the children to continue there. I work with my supervising social worker to sort out the dates. She comes out to see us every month, and it's all very relaxed. I find Robin really easy to speak to. She listens to my concerns, and I value what she is saying to me in return.
The benefits of a supervising social worker are always having someone to contact. There is also emergency duty team that they can contact on a weekend and out of hours. I think the times that it gets difficult is when, you know, she's supported a child for a long time and then they're either moving on out of area or they're moving on because they've reached the age of 18, you know, and she has to say goodbye to that child, so that can be always emotionally draining. Generally it's staying in touch so they know that you do care about them and you are concerned, you know, that the impact that something like that has had on them.
You do feel fully supported. It's like working in a team. We still even now go on training sessions. I almost look forward to those sessions because you meet other foster carers there and it's very interesting. I've always fostered with my husband, who's brilliant, and I feel personally I couldn't do it without him. He's super with the kids, and it's just something we continue to enjoy doing. A lot of our friends feel at the ages we are, we shouldn't be doing it, but it's a way of life for us now.
I'm Mark, I'm a foster carer dad in the family. I'm the fun dad, if you like. I've tried to be anyway, try to be.
And I'm Amy, a foster carer. So we have 4 children of our own and then we foster younger children into our family. Being a foster carer is a devastating privilege. It's devastating that children have to be in this situation, and yet what a privilege that we are able to help them.
Yeah.
When you foster as a family. I think it's very important that everybody in your house is involved, and even though we have 4 children of our own, we don't find that a challenge, we find that quite an easy thing to do. Daniel particularly, he's older and he sees more and he understands more because he's older, and he feels that it's given him an insight as to when he's older and he has his own children. Whenever a placement ends, we always ask them, do you want to do it again? Would you like another child? And it's always yes. And even though we've had the sadness maybe of a child leaving, and they are sad when a child leaves, the positive that we get out of it, they get to see, as we do, the happiness when a child leaves us, and that inspires them as well to want to do it again and again and again, as well as us.
When a child leaves, it's sad for us, but it's happy for them.
The biggest thing for us has been the support network, because if it wasn't for them, I don't think we would be able to carry on. I think it's a big thing to know that there's always someone there if you've ever got problems. And for our children, they really enjoy the events that we attend. We've been quite surprised at actually the amount of events there are.
Barbecues and picnics and
local supports
and Foster's Got Talent. We've been to the Christmas do's and the Sons and Daughters events here today are fantastic for our children. They really enjoy it, and I think it's a lovely thing for them to do.
And it's very empowering for them to know that they're appreciated as a child in a foster family.
We are allocated to new foster carers so that we can give them support and advice before they get their new placement. So we might go out and give them some advice around therapeutic parenting and kind of build up their foster carer toolkit before they begin.
Yeah, and we've got an idea of obviously the child who's being placed with them, so that we can tell them some background about that particular child.
We find that children that have experienced trauma or have attachment needs are more responsive to therapeutic parenting than your average parenting. So that's very much what we encourage our foster carers to do.
Theraplay is obviously a form of therapeutic parenting. A lot of the foster children, their early life experiences of being quite sad, really. They haven't had any compliments. Nobody's ever said that they've got nice eyes. Nobody's said that the hair's nice. So that is something that we always start off to build their self-esteem.
Yeah, there's lots of nurturing activities, so tactile, you know, skin to skin contact, eye contact. We'll offer nurturing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barker. Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Eric Kerry, the chair of the committee, and I would like to welcome you to this delayed annual general meeting of the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee, which is being held remotely, broadcast live and recorded for publication, with the majority of members joining the meeting from their own homes. As well as myself, the other members virtually present in the meeting today are Vice Chairman Councillor Stephen Garner, Councillor Reg Adair, Councillor Chris Barnfather, Councillor Tom Hollis, Councillor Sheila Place, Councillor Mike Pringle, Councillor Francis Purdue-Horan, Councillor Parry Simberidis, Councillor Graham Chapman, Councillor Anne Peach, Councillor David Lloyd, Councillor Gordon Moore. And in addition, we have Mr. Chris King, Mr. Alan Woodward, Mrs. Sue Reeder, and Mr. Terry Needham. The Independent Advisors Committee is also present, Mr. William Bourne, and we have the following officers present today: the Service Director for Finance, Infrastructure and Improvement, Nigel Stevenson; Group Manager for Finance, Strategy and Compliance, Keith Palfreman; Group Manager, Business Support Centre and Employee Support Centre, Sarah Stevenson; Pensions Team Manager, John Clues; Senior Finance Business Partner, Tamsin Rabbits; and the Clerk to the meeting, Peter Barker. Can I also welcome Mr. Barry McKay and Chris Donnelly from Barnet Waddingham, who will be delivering a presentation to the committee on the actuarial issues. Today's meeting will be held in line with the new requirements of the Coronavirus Act 2020. Please do bear with us if we experience any technical issues. If we do lose any members from the call temporarily, then officers will seek to assist in getting them reconnected as soon as possible, hopefully without the need to halt proceedings. However, officers will inform the meeting if they are unable to rectify the problem and if we need the meeting to be paused or adjourned temporarily. Could I ask all those at the meeting please mute their microphones unless they're speaking? This will help with the quality of the meeting, video, etc. So moving on to item number 2, the apologies for absence. Can I ask the committee clerk, Mr. Barker, if there are any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've just had one apology, and that's from Councillor Webster from Nottingham City Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do any members have any other apologies that we're not aware of? No. Okay, thank you. Item number 3 is declarations of interest. Do any members or officers present have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Do any members or officers present have any private interest, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? I don't see any hands raised, so I'll take that as a no. Thank you very much. So moving on to item number 4, the notes of the previous year's meeting held on the 3rd of October 2019. Seems a long time ago, isn't it? Do any members have any comments or questions regarding those notes, please? Just indicate with your hands.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I don't see the name. Sorry, would you like to speak, please? Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Councillor Tom Hollis.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm having a problem with my device again still. I've got, so I'm having to do it from my mobile phone, so I do hope you can pick me up okay. But no, Mr. Chairman, I don't think members of the committee will be surprised again for me to reiterate my displeasure and concern about various strategies that are outlined in this report.
Can I, Mr. Councillor Hollis, just quickly, this is about approving the notes from the previous meeting, and that's the item we're on now. If you want to talk about other things during the meeting, I'll certainly give you an opportunity. This is about just approving that the notes of the minutes of the last meeting are as what happened. I don't think you were there, so actually I'm not sure whether your comments are relevant. So unless there's something relevant to the notes, I'll move on.
If you'd rather me save comments to a later agenda item.
In the meeting, where it's relevant, please. Unless you have a specific on the notes. If you've got a line number or a paragraph number you want to refer to, then that's fine. But you weren't there, so I find it difficult that you could actually comment relevantly. Okay. Anybody else have any comments about the meeting, the last year's meeting, please? Okay. Can I have all voting members, therefore, to indicate their approval of the notes? I won't do a formal vote. Just indicate if you have any other questions or comments, please. Okay. Having no comment, I'll take that as that the notes are approved. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to item number 5, which is actuarial issues, and a presentation from Barnett Waddingham. The slides for all the presentations have been sent. Hello?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you purposefully brushed over my comments there, but I did actually have some comments on the notes, but you seem to have gone past them.
Oh, I didn't hear you respond, Councillor Hollis, to the notes.
If able, then
Councillor Hollis, you were not at the meeting. So are the notes? Do the notes need changing?
I don't know if
all we're doing is approving the notes, Councillor Hollis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All we've done is approve the notes.
It was represented, and unless your group works in a different way, we go through all the agenda items in our group. I am the official group member of the Ashfield Independents on the Pensions Committee, and I believe the notes need comment. Unless I'm missing procedural rule here, comments can be made on them, of which I believe the appropriate comment needs to be made. So, unless you feel that I'm speaking out of turn, I'd like to make a number of comments.
I'll just ask the officers, Democratic Service officers, just to clarify that point, please.
Yep. Thanks very much, Chair. Given the nature of the meeting, with concentrating on the financial aspects of the pension committee, then I think it's legitimate under item 4, the notes of the previous meeting, to bring up matters arising. So I think that is legitimate, Chair. Thanks for checking.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hollis. Thank you. Please continue.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Barker, for commenting. But my concerns really are really to express the concerns of a number of strategies outlined in the past year's action of the Pension Committee, a number of which are outlined under a series of headings on page 1 to 30 in our agenda pack. And I think no more stark concern being raised in our group than on page 5, where it says most of the way down, a major review of asset allocation took place during the year. Yet, one thing that didn't take place is an investment strategy review. An investment strategy review of which our pension committee is extremely outdated, not only with public sentiment, but also out of step with many of the views now across Nottinghamshire. All members of the county council, and I'm sure city council, as well as officers of this committee, will be aware of a number of correspondence from local Nottinghamshire residents that we manage funds on behalf of, expressing their concerns about climate change and our investment strategy in fossil fuels. Members of the committee won't be surprised to hear me reiterate again my displeasure and, frankly, uncomfortableness with our strategy. Not only do I think it's ethically wrong, I think it's just as bad as investing in military weaponry, arms, etc. And we need to take a stance, and we fundamentally, you and yourself, Mr. Chairman, need to take a personal stance on changing the direction of the Pensions Committee investment. But something that I know will be close to your heart as a Conservative member, Mr. Chairman, is our main objective is a fiduciary duty of the pension committee pension payees, that we are responsible of their money. That's firefighters, police officers, local government officers, schools, all sorts of public sector workers that we manage funds on behalf of, many of which express their displeasure in our fund investments. But we are investing their funds in things that are damaging the climate, but also it's a bad financial investment. Mr. Chairman, under your leadership,
Mr. Chairman, point of order, please.
I'm sorry, who we have a point of order from, please?
Councillor Francis Purdue-Horan.
What point of order?
What kind of point of order, Councillor Purdue-Horan?
Mr. Chairman, this is a speech we're listening to. This is not about the notes of the AGM held on the 3rd of October 2019. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities throughout the year when we have the opportunity for members to comment on policy. And what we're listening to now is just simply a political speech playing to the gallery. And I think all of the members take their duties seriously on this committee. We don't have to listen to someone who's not qualified really to talk about.
I understand your point, Councillor Pilaran.
Chairman, sorry
Yeah.
to intervene. Sorry, Chairman. Keith Ford, Team Manager, Democratic Services. Just
Yeah.
to clarify, sorry, I think my advice to people was a bit lost in translation. In terms of the minutes of the previous meeting, the item is solely about agreeing the accuracy of those minutes. So it shouldn't be an opportunity to raise matters arising, and that sort of goes against access to information rules. So I think your initial advice to Councillor Hollis about raising this at an appropriate point within the meeting probably stands really. So I just wanted to make that point clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. I thought that was the case, but I wasn't going to have an argument with the officers at that.
No, I do apologise. Yeah, I misunderstood the instructions.
I understand. Councillor Horan, can I just finish, please, before we move on? Thank you very much for your point of order. I'll just make a comment to Councillor Hollis. You have another half a minute just to finish up, and then I'm sure you'll have an opportunity elsewhere.
Thank you. I certainly don't take personal attacks. I mean, my family have a larger share.
Councillor Hollis, you're wasting your own time by taking that chain.
That's fine, but this pension fund has lost £81 million of taxpayers' money across Nottinghamshire and Nottingham City due to its investment strategy in fossil fuels.
Yeah.
I fundamentally disagree with the leadership of this committee, officers' advice, and the notes made in this agenda. And the committee and yourself won't be surprised to hear me make comments that support letters that we've received from Nottinghamshire residents. And frankly, the final comment I'll make, Mr. Chairman, Ashfield District Council will formally be removing ourselves from the pension fund managed by Nottinghamshire County Council unless this leadership changes at the AGM in May. And I seriously hope residents of Nottinghamshire listening to this will either vote for their local independent candidate or Green candidate across Nottinghamshire during the next elections.
Okay, thank you very much.
This is unbelievable.
Come on, Mr. Chairman, let's move on and get on with the business of the day.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Look, this would have come out. I understand. I think we've now got through that. We've had the comment from Councillor Hollis. Is obviously politicising a pension fund, which has not ever been in my experience and ever been politicised in this way. We will get answers to all of those questions during the meeting today, and I'm sure that the majority of people in Nottinghamshire will understand that the committee has done its duty according to the regulations and according to investment policies and strategies that we will hear later on in this meeting. So I'm now moving on to the presentation from Barnet Waddingham. So going back, the slides of all the presentations have been sent to members and are available to everybody on the County Council website. So moving on then, I'd like to invite Mr. Barry McKay to deliver the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can all hear me.
Yes.
So good morning. I'm Barry Mackay. I'm from Barnet Waddingham. I'm the fund actuary to the fund. I hope you're all surviving the current lockdown restrictions. It's getting a bit Groundhog Day. But thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. It's just a shame I can't be there in person, but hopefully next year. No surprise, I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the pension fund, and also cover a couple of the regulatory changes or consultations that came out in the summer and how those potentially impact the fund and its employers. So we'll just have a recap of the 2019 valuations and see how the pandemic has impacted markets and what it means for the funding position of the fund. And of course, it wouldn't be an actuarial presentation if I didn't talk about mortality and death. So we'll have a look at that as well, albeit a bit of a morbid subject. On the regulatory activity, there's been quite a number of things. I'm just going to choose a couple in the interest of time, which will be hopefully be familiar to you. It's the McLeod discrimination case, and also some issues around employer flexibilities I'll cover later in the presentation. So just a reminder of the funding position, where the fund was at the last formal actuarial valuation that we carried out 31st March 2019, before we bring up to the current position. So going from, just a reminder, we carry out this formal valuation once every 3 years. So, as I say, the last valuation was March 2019, the one before that was March 2016, and the funding position improved from 87% to 93% over those 3 years. So the funding level, which is the ratio of assets you have to pay out all the benefits, was 93%. So for every £100 of pension you're paying out, had to promise to pay out to members, you're holding £93 of assets. So an improvement in the funding position, and obviously a corresponding reduction in the deficit from 621 million to just over 400 million at that time. And the reasons for those improvements were you achieved strong investment returns over the 3-year period from 2016 to 19. So the actual assets performance was around 10.3% per annum against what they actually had assumed of around 5.4. So quite an excessive return on the assets relative to how the liabilities were growing. Of course, they actually kind of is interested in liabilities. We look after the liability side, and we'll come back to that in a second. And there had been a slowdown in improvements in life expectancy. So that also meant that the value that we placed on the liabilities as part of the 2019 valuation was slightly lower than we would have previously, because although people were still living longer, they weren't living quite as long. We weren't expecting to live quite as long as we did in 2016. This is all before COVID came along, of course. We'll come on to that in a moment. What did happen was, on the other side of the coin, is that the cost of benefits increased, and that was because of higher expectation of inflation in the future, and also lower investment returns. I'll return to that theme in a second. So overall, the contributions remained roughly the same for the employers in general. There obviously be variation by employer, but broadly they were about the same. So if we fast forward to now, what's happened since then? So no doubt you're aware markets have been very volatile. This chart here shows the return on the equity and gilt markets. So I'm colourblind, but I'll try and explain this chart. So the quite jagged lines, the yellow one is the daily return on equities. The green line is the daily return on gilts, and the blue line is what the fund has actually returned. This actual fund return. You'll see there's just a straight line, which is kind of grey coloured, and that is what they actually assumed would happen. So, in summary, over that period, we expected or hoped that the return would be at least 8% per annum to keep pace with the increase in liabilities, but the fund has actually returned around 13%. So, even though the market has been very volatile, as you can see here, for the first 10 months from March 19 to January 2020, assets did pretty well, certainly ahead of expectations. But then COVID arrived, and markets, of course, as we know, plummeted by around 15% in a sort of 6-week period. But then they've bounced back. It took a wee bit longer to bounce back over a period of a few months, but they've bounced back and they've continued in a sort of upward trend since then. So, as I say, the fund's assets have returned approximately about 13% to 31st December, ahead of the expectation of 8%. So the assets have done well, but we need to look at, as I mentioned earlier, the funding position is the ratio of assets to liabilities. So we need to look at the liabilities as well and how they've changed. And what's happened is, under our assumptions, we think, or if we were carrying out evaluation now, we would place a higher value on the liabilities, and that's because the returns we expect on your investments in the future has come down. So the world is a bit of a different place at the moment. We're always looking out to the long term, so we don't worry about the short term volatilities and too much. But in general, we think that the returns in the future are likely to be lower than they have been in the past. So that pushes the value we place in the liabilities up, because you're going to need to pay in more money for your investments to generate returns to meet the cost of those benefits. On the plus side, our expectation of inflation has also fallen by around 30 basis points, so 0.3% per annum. And so that dampens the increase on the liabilities. And therefore, overall, we expect the liabilities have probably gone up by around 13-14%. So in fact, similar to the increase in the assets, which, the sort of strap line at the bottom there is that we expect the funding level to be broadly similar as at 31st December 2020 as to where it was at 31st March 2019, which, given all that's happened, is probably a good, probably quite happy with that. It's probably a pretty good result. Okay. I should have said I'm happy to take questions as we go, but I'll keep moving on until anyone raises their hand. What that chart doesn't do, so we're now on slide 5. What that chart doesn't do is allow for changes in the membership and the experience of the membership, and of course changes in longevities assumptions. And that's because we haven't got the data yet to analyse the impact of COVID and the experience of the fund. So we'll do that at the next valuation, which will be 2022. But on slide 5, what we're showing here, which I thought would be of interest to you, is the number of deaths registered each week in England and Wales for 2020. And there's 3 parts to this. So the green bars are the deaths. Sorry, it's a bit of a morbid subject, but the deaths not involving COVID. The blue bars are those deaths that have been registered that do involve COVID, and the dashed line is the average number of deaths over the last 5 years. So that's what we maybe would have expected, roughly, that dashed line. And so, not surprisingly, obviously, there was more deaths than average in April and May, and then again in November and December. We if you want to call it the first and second wave of the pandemic, we can see that the bars are quite a bit higher than the average, the dashed line average. Certainly back in April and May, there's some deaths in there that are COVID related that weren't recorded as such. We can see the green bars are a good bit higher than the average, which is probably not actually the case. Those excess deaths were probably related to COVID in some way, whether it's because people couldn't get treatments or couldn't get to the hospital, for whatever reason, it was quite a bit higher. So that's not necessarily surprising. I guess what I was highlighting here is the other part, which might be of interest, where I've put a number 1 on the chart. We actually see less deaths than the 5-year average if we ignore COVID. So back in February, before we knew about it, there was certainly fewer deaths than the 5-year average. And then even at November, December time, if we strip out those deaths relating to COVID, then again, the number of deaths were lower than the average. So it's all very variable at the moment, and we need to do more work. But what might that tell us about the impact on the pension fund? If we just go on to slide 6. This chart, what does this mean for pension schemes? This chart shows the number of deaths, a bit like the last one, but split by age group. And again, unsurprisingly, as we probably all know, the majority of excess deaths due to COVID have been at those older ages, as shown in this sort of bar chart. And so older members tend to have smaller pensions, and of course are likely to receive them for less time than a younger pensioner on average. So what this means is the impact on the pension fund might be relatively small. As I say, we need to do more work on this, but our best guess is that it might only reduce the liabilities by around 1% or so. So obviously, lots of this is in the news every day, and it's really bad news. It's really terrible. But in pension scheme terms, it might not have a huge impact on the fund's membership nor the liabilities. As I keep saying, we'll need to do analysis once we get the data, and we do think there'll be even more variation across the UK. We'll see, bigger changes geographically than even the normal. So we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. But we don't think it's going to have a huge impact on the pension fund at the moment. So that's all I was going to say on the updated position to December 2020 for the fund. Is there any questions on that before I move on, Chair?
Thank you, Barry. Can I just ask one question about, so you mentioned that there was a reduction in mortality during that April period prior to COVID, or it looked like that was the trend. That's the previous trend in long-term mortality that you've assumed in your long-term picture, and that COVID obviously has changed that. It's short term, but we don't really know what COVID's effect is going to be in even the mid to long term because of the nature of the virus and similar viruses and vaccines, etc. So it is a picture that is difficult to see the future, predict the future.
Yeah. That's exactly it. In a nutshell, so those trends. The 2019 valuation, we assumed that life expectancy was still increasing, but it was increasing more slowly than the previous decades. And I think I probably spoke about this maybe a year or two ago, where since 2011 to about 2018, so for a period of around 7 years, we have seen a slowing down of the increases in life expectancy. So it's important that as the increases, life expectancy is still going up, but it's not going up as fast. Now, what the interesting thing about that chart on page 5 at the start of the year, as you point out, Chair, is that life expectancy, the number of deaths is a bit less than before. So the question is, before COVID, was life expectancy beginning to increase more quickly again? And of course, then COVID came along, and as you say, it's very difficult to predict how this is going to impact life expectancy in the future. Will we get this under control once and for all, and therefore it's a short-term blip, or will there be future strains and variants of it, and therefore this, the trend of excess deaths might continue for a little longer? And we don't know the answers yet, as you say. But it's something we'll be working on ahead of the next valuation.
I do have another question, if that's okay, before I open it up to the floor. Obviously, COVID has its impact globally, and that was starting to happen in the February, March, whatever, of last year. Prior to that dip in global markets, we were in even better position in terms of our liability funding at that time, I believe. So picture could have been better than this in the report that you're presenting, if not for COVID, in terms of our financing of our future liabilities.
Absolutely, and there's I think I mentioned that for the first 10 months or so before COVID, from March 19 to December or into January 2020, the funding level had improved. Markets then fell significantly, and we're now just kind of back to where we were then, if that makes sense. So we've probably taken the best part of the second half of that 18-month period to catch up to just be back where we were at December 19. So yes, if the direction of travel had been the same, we'd be a bit better off than we are. But William might have comments on that in terms of how markets have performed, and we'll never know, if the pandemic hadn't come along, where it would be. But yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to open it up to members, please. Any questions or comments?
I think Mr. Needham's got a question,
Terry.
Chair.
Yes, please.
As things change so quickly, Barry, is there a case for longer or shorter valuation periods rather than the 3 years? Make it 5 or make it 2? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually one of the things that's out for consultation at the moment. We provide the fund we can provide the fund with updates quarterly anyway. In fact, we've got a technology now that we can do it actually daily, but why you wouldn't want to do that. In terms of a formal valuation, I still think 3 years might be about right, because there's lots of different employers in the fund, as you know, and they've got different time frames participating in the fund, and therefore we need to make sure that those employers with shorter time horizons are paying the right level of contributions in. So you could argue for the councils, we could make it longer, but for those other employers, we need to keep it quite short. So I guess on average, 3 years still feels about right. The second point is we're always looking out to sort of, pension funding is a long-term game. We hope that the LGPS are around for a long time. And so we're always looking out 10, 20, 30 years. And therefore, these kind of short-term volatilities we're not too concerned about. And we've got a mechanism and an approach in our valuation methodology that takes some of that volatility out.
Yeah, and we did have a report from you last year. I think in June, July time of last year, an update. So it was presented to the committee at that time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments, please? I can't see any other raised hands. Okay, well, it was a very comprehensive presentation, Barry. Thank you very, very much for that.
I did have a second part, but if you're out of time, we can skip on. The second part won't take as long. That was the main elements.
Yes.
I'm on to slide 7. Hopefully that's the same. I don't know what it is in your pack, but
with the bus.
There's a bus, and the point being that you wait around for a bus, and then a whole number of them come along at once. And this was happened in the LGPS with consultations. There wasn't anything much happening for a while, even though we knew there's things in the pipeline. And now we've been hit with, over the summer, we've hit with the McLeod consultation, responses to the 95k exit cap for redundancies, employer flexibilities, GMP, equalisation, and so on. In the interest of time, I'm only going to speak about 2 of them today. The first one being the McLeod discrimination case, and the second one on employer flexibility. So just to give a bit of an update on McLeod, on slide 8, and I'll hopefully the background. So, but I'm happy to take questions on it if you don't. But more around about the funding and the possible impact on the fund. The Government Action Department carried out some work and estimated that the increase in liabilities for the fund as a result of the McLeod discrimination case would be around £2.5 billion. So a very large number, but that number is very sensitive to salary increases. And for reasons I won't go into in too much detail, but you're comparing a final salary benefit with a career average benefit, and therefore if salary increases are very high, then the cost of MacLeod will be higher. And the Government Action Department assumed that salaries would increase at a rate of 2.25% above CPI, which, given the last 10 years of public sector increases, that sounds optimistic to say the least. On our assumption, we have assumed that salary increases will increase by around 1% above CPI, so consumer price inflation, which was the same as our assumption at the 2019 valuation. And therefore, the increase across the entire LGPS would be around 1 billion. So, which is, the scheme is around 300 billion, so 0.3% or so on. So not significant, not too significant. And then the increase in contributions would be around 0.5% of pay, which of course is a little bit more significant, but not the sort of numbers that the Government Action Department were talking about. One important point for the committee here is that this will result in a lot of work for administration teams, and that should not be lost. In fact, the administration costs might actually cost more than the than the increase in liabilities if we're not careful. So that's important. On slide 9, I just talk quickly about the rules of thumb, and there's 3 main points here that impact the cost of MacLeod. One's the salary increase assumption, as I've mentioned. The higher it is, the more MacLeod will cost. The second one is those members who leave the scheme, deferred members as we call them, and the more that leave, then the less likely the underpin on MacLeod will bite, because they lose their link to final salary. And the last one is age profile. So the younger membership profile that you have, the more likely the final salary pension will kick in as an underpin, because you've got a lot more salary increases between now and retirement than if you're older members. So how that relates to employers in the fund, I've kind of summarised on slide 10, split into councils, academies and mission bodies. The council tend to have an older membership profile, they're fairly stable, so it shouldn't impact the councils too much at all. Academies tend to have younger members of staff, and therefore it could see an impact on them, although they tend to have lower salary increases as well, so actual salary increases. So more time for that to catch up relative to care benefit, but we'll need to wait and see. And then at admission bodies, it's difficult to say. There's a range of profiles, and the answer could be quite variable. So again, this is what we'd like to do for the fund, and we'll definitely do it at 2022 in any case. But we'll see how those impacts pan out. And the last area, just to talk about the consultation on employer flexibilities, and this has been we've a consultation on this because there's so many different types of employers in the fund now that a one size doesn't fit all, and so there's a consultation to introduce these flexibilities for the benefit of the fund and its employers, and there's 3 parts to this. The first is the contribution review. So as you know, each formal valuation, we set the contributions for the next 3 years, and they're kind of set in stone. We can't really change those unless something quite significant happens. They're now suggesting that if there's material changes in the liability profile or the covenant of the employer, the strength of the employer, then you could carry out a review and amend the contribution rate during the intervaluation period. The second one is on those employers ceasing and leaving the LGPS, and there's been this long-term problem of they can't afford to stay in and they can't afford to get out, because when they leave, they have to quite often pay quite a significant debt, quite a significant lump sum to the fund to make sure all their obligations are paid in the future. So one of the ideas is to spread those exit payments. So instead of asking a small charity for £200,000 tomorrow, you say, well, you can pay us a smaller amount over the next 5 years. And then the third one's a deferred debt arrangement, which is, again, for those employers that have left the scheme or are leaving the scheme, but don't want to trigger a cessation. So you almost treat them like an ongoing employer. You revalue their funding position regularly, and they still take the risk of adverse or better experience. So their debt may go up or down over time, and they'll eventually need to pay that off. So we think most funds were in favour of all these ideas. It does kind of help the fund manage their risk. But that's all I'll say on that. And then the last slide is just looking forward, slide 13, and just some work we're doing with the fund. So we're spending a bit more time checking membership and cash flow data. There's more and more scrutiny on data, as you know, from various stakeholders. I mentioned earlier we can monitor funding positions for the whole fund and employers, and we will be, of course, reviewing the actual assumptions in light of COVID. And we're keen to do more work with employers, but I'll end on that point and happy to take any questions. Thanks.
If I can come in first, we're going to have a presentation later on in the meeting about our admin team and what we're doing in terms of that employer engagement, communication, all those kind of things. So yes, we are aware of all the implications, obviously, that you've just brought up. I'll open it out to any other questions or comments, please. That's a sign that your presentation was so comprehensive and full of detail, Barry, that I think you've answered everybody's questions.
Yeah, hopefully, or people are checking emails.
Yes, but obviously, if anybody has any other questions that come in the next few days, whatever, we can get in touch with you and ask you.
Yep, sure.
Fantastic. Okay, may I thank you and your team for your work, and thank you for the presentation. Very informative. Thank you very much for attending.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Okay, cheers. Okay, we're now moving on to item number 6, which is management and financial performance. Can I invite Mr. Palfreman to deliver the presentation, please?
Thanks very much, Chair. As you said, Keith Palfreman, Group Manager, Financial Services. Again, I'm going to run through the slides. I'm going to put them on the screen, but hopefully everyone has access to them. Thank you. So slide 2 just shows details of what I'm going to cover. So going to look at key figures from the accounts, net additions or withdrawals from members, net return on investments, investment management expenses, brief update on LGPS Central, and a brief summary at the end. So slide 3, headed pension fund key figures. This shows some key numbers over the last 5 years, including 1920, showing the net additions and withdrawals from dealings with members, net return on investments, closing net assets, and the actuarial funding level. So the funding level is calculated by the fund's actuaries, Barnett Waddingham, every 3 years, as Barry mentioned just in his previous presentation. Triennial valuation took place as at the 31st of March 2019, and the improvement in funding level reflected additional employer contributions and better than anticipated investment returns to that date. The funding level will change based on a combination in the movement of asset values and liabilities. Again, Barry's covered some of that in the previous presentation. And just for information, obviously the market downturn in March due to COVID-19 impacted the value of the fund as at the 30th of March 2020. But as at the end of September 2020, the fund had recovered the losses experienced during that period. Next slide, slide 4. The net position from dealings with members will increasingly be a withdrawal going forwards. This trend can be seen from the graph on slide 4. However, in 1718, a number of the larger employers made significant contributions to fund deficits, which gave an exceptional net addition in that year. So overall, as you can see, we're heading towards net withdrawals as a fund. Next slide shows the gross movements, and you can see that contributions no longer fully cover benefit payments, but again, 1718 is an exception due to the one-off contributions. The net transfers in and out are marginal, but in future will not be able to rely on member contributions to cover pensions. However, the fund has significant investment income to support cash flow. Slide 6 looks at investment income. And looking at investment income on the next slide shows a lower figure for 1920. The apparent reductions in income from equities during 1920 relates to the increased proportion of investments held in accumulation funds rather than income units. And this means the income is automatically reinvested on our behalf. Investment income remains available for use as contributions fall short of benefit payments, but assets do not need to be sold to pay pensions. Slide 7 shows the volatility of market values, which are reflected in the changes in value figure, the red figure on the graph. Compared with asset values, investment income is relatively stable. So just again, just a review over the previous 5 years showing the position. Slide 9 shows the net assets. This shows the net assets as at 31st of March 2020 decreased by 7% in the last year, as can be seen. But as previously stated, 1920 reductions were recovered by September 2020. Investment management expenses. The next slide shows the investment management expenses in total and as a percentage of the fund. So the stability of the fund's investment arrangements help to keep investment costs low. So the left hand, the bar chart shows the cost in millions, and the right hand and the line chart show the cost as a percentage of the fund, so about 0.1%. Over time, we expect to be able to reduce fee rates as we negotiate lower fees and benefit from the negotiating power of LGPS Central. The transparency is improving in this area so that fees are becoming more accurately reported. Next slide, slide 10, just gives a brief update on asset pooling. We established LGPS Central as our pool company in the 1st of April 2018. The Pension Fund Committee retains asset allocation responsibilities, which is the key driver of returns. Investment sub-funds will be developed by LGPS Central over a number of years, but so far we've invested in corporate bonds, emerging market equities, passive UK and global equities, active equities and private equity. And just a summary, the fund continues to have positive net cash flow due to investment income. LGPS Central Limited is well established and continues to set up investment funds which we're investing in. Net assets decreased in 1920. Market volatility, due mainly to uncertainty surrounding coronavirus, remains an issue in 2021. Thank you, Chair. So I'm mute, Chair.
Muted. Yeah. Thank you very much, Keith, for the presentation. I'll open it up to floor questions for members' comments, please. I have a raised hand, but I can't see on my screen who it is.
Mr. Chairman, it's Councillor Hollis. I do apologise. Yeah,
thank you.
And just for members who maybe haven't seen the chat, I have experienced a few technical issues this morning, so I'm just using Councillor Zadrozny's device. So not worry, I've not promoted myself unilaterally, so don't worry about that. But no, it was really a very blunt question regarding net return on investments. And obviously we were presented with the chart accordingly. And a very, very blunt question really with regards to choice of investments. Obviously this council has chosen not to divest from fossil fuels. That turned out not only to be a bad ethical decision, as I previously said, but also a financial decision. I was wondering what the officers' opinion of this with regards to how much of a financial benefit we would have had if we'd have chosen to withdraw from fossil fuels at the appropriate time when the Ashfield Independents advised this committee to do so, and how much of an impact the drop of investment in fossil fuels has had an impact on our net return. Obviously, we're aware of the £81 million this fund has lost, but if it was invested in more renewable energies, what kind of impact would that have had financially on this committee, particularly relating to the chart we've just been presented with as part of this report? So it'd be great to have a detailed answer on that one, Mr. Chairman, purely on a financial basis. Thank you.
Well, okay, I'll come back generally to start with. We've got answers to questions from public and employers later on in the meeting, which covers this subject in more detail. We take advice. I don't make a decision for this committee. The committee listens to advisors, to professionals, and those decisions are made so that we can get the best return we can in the long term and at the lowest cost for for the committee, so for the pension fund, to protect the investments and get the return that we need to pay out our liabilities. I will ask Mr. Bourne, who is our advisor, to come in and respond to that before we move on to Mr. Palfreman to respond. Mr. Bourne, please.
Right, thank you very much, Chair. And I think I'd like to start off by saying two things. One is that as the advisor, my job is to provide professional advice. I don't have any other angle other than helping officers in the committee. The second thing I'd like to say is just that you quote a figure of £81 million because that's what was in the paper article. When the response is given to the question later on, it is not that £81 million is not a figure which has been verified by anybody else, and it's not actually a loss to the fund. It may be an opportunity cost. Please, I see you shaking your head, but it is maybe an opportunity cost. It is not a loss per se. But the problem is that the data there is not sufficient to actually say exactly how much was lost, whether we could have done better. Let me come on to just talking a little bit about divestment. And it's often presented that divestment and engagement are two equal, different alternatives. And for the pension fund, they're not. They may be if you're an individual, or even if you're a sovereign wealth fund, because if you lose the money there, then that's your loss. But as Councillor Hollis said earlier, we have a fiduciary duty to 170,000 pensioners, and therefore we have to take decisions in a considered way. This committee cannot let itself be kind of focused on simply one issue. We have to look at things in the round and over the very long term. And the problem here, the other thing we have to do is to, as best we can, use data that is robust. And the problem with the whole area of carbon emissions and climate change is that the data is very far from clear. Just give you a few examples. When you're looking at carbon emissions, none of the data provided, that's not true, most of the data provided by the company is not audited, it's not standardized, it doesn't include what is called scope 3, i.e. if you buy a car, what are the emissions of you using a petrol car? There's all sorts of areas it does not include. If you're looking at divestment, take a company like Equinor, which is the old Norwegian Statoil, the Norwegian state oil company. That company is behind the largest wind turbine development in the North Sea. Now, does that make it a good company or a bad company? And the reality is that within the fossil fuel sector, some companies will make the transition and actually be part of the solution. Other companies will not. And that's why a blanket diversification, a blanket divestment policy is a really dangerous policy. And that's why I say that if you cannot look on divestment and on engagement as two different equal alternatives. Quick comment on engagement. This fund has, alongside most of the LGPS, has focused on engagement over the years. I hosted a webinar yesterday of 40 very senior investors from Europe, UK and America. I actually made the point, which Councillor Hollis has made today, that there's a large public opinion saying they'd like to divest, but not a single person of those 40 members was prepared to support divestment. They all said that engagement is a far better way of actually achieving change, and divestment should only be used as a very final kind of sanction if a company simply won't change. In reality, companies that don't change, we know, are going to die. That doesn't mean we have to invest in them, but a policy of blanket divestment is actually quite dangerous to the pensioners. Final comment. I think there was an earlier comment made about the investment strategy. We reviewed it in 2018 at a major review. We reviewed it at a working party January 2020. We're doing it again in 2021. And every time we have actually looked at the ESG, kind of what we could do to try and
be part of the process of helping to solve the problem of climate change? Because I think we all agree that there is a major issue and we cannot just ignore it. But it's not the pension funds' role to change the world. It is our role ultimately to pay pensions. And I'm sorry if it's a bit of a long speech on that, but I do feel very strongly that you cannot look on divestment and engagement as being two equal alternatives. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood. Councillor Hollis, we will be talking about this. You know that there were opportunities. There have been opportunities where you've been invited to, and your group have been invited to these meetings, and frankly haven't turned up. But we still have an open door for you to contribute to that process. We welcome you.
No, Mr. Chairman. I know. Just to briefly come back on that, and of course we all of the committee members respect Mr. Bourne's professional judgment, and I think just to provide a slight comment from opposition members on that and myself is, under that same theory, what if purely looking at it on a financial basis, if we aren't going to have principles, there's a lot of wars going on across the world, Mr. Chairman, why don't we invest in arms? Because that will make this committee money. But we fundamentally took a stance not to do that. And I think when it turns, and while I agree with some of what Mr. Bourne said, this committee does need to put a line in the sand about its commitment. A commitment to divest, not straight away, but over time, if that's what the committee's minded to do. I mean, if it was up to me, it'd be straight away. But I think we do have to have a commitment to say, this is where we are now, this is where we want to be, and let's look at the steps to get there. At the moment, we don't have those steps, we don't have a priority, we don't have an agenda. And I think actually we need to put ourselves back in step, as the current government's done, with regards to taking fossil fuel cars off the road, fossil fuel boilers off the road. We all know new build properties cannot have fossil fuel powered boilers in years to come. Cars cannot be fired by fossil fuels in years to come. We know that, yet we still invest in the oil companies that pump oil into cars. Financially, we know governments across the world, particularly Western governments, are moving away from the use of fossil fuels. So, yes, while I respect, and we all know the good commitments and the right steps that people like Shell and other oil companies are making towards the green agenda, but it's a token gesture to try and, almost in the same way the tobacco industry did it back in the day, the fossil fuels are following the same trajectory of trying to be on the right side of public opinion. But you cannot get around the fact they are the ones drilling oil out of the ground, digging coal up out of the ground, and then polluting our atmosphere with it. And that's the way we choose to invest 170,000 pensioners' money. Mr. Councillor Adair, I have a right to speak as you do, and I'd gladly hear your opinion after I speak.
Can we not have
We're purely talking financial, Mr. Chairman. You'll know.
The chair is speaking. The chair is speaking, Councillor.
Please speak. But I don't seem to be respected by the committee members, Mr. Chairman.
Yet again.
If you don't like what I've got to say, Mr. Chairman, that's fair enough. But I've given ground to you, but committee members spoken over me.
To speak, Councillor Hollis, and that's what I always do. You know that in my meetings. So you've had plenty of opportunity. Please, can you summarise what you're saying? We don't want to debate here. We've got a lot of work to do. Come to the meeting, the next working group. And we'll just open-minded, Councillor Hollis.
Unless I'm missing something, this is the Pensions Committee which makes these decisions. I'm vocalising.
This is the AGM, Councillor Hollis. We don't make those decisions here today. We make them through the normal process, through the committee process. We're not making a decision on fossil fuel investment today.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a very experienced councillor, a deputy leader of an authority in Nottinghamshire. I have a decade of service in local government. I understand our committee's work. Decision makers and advisors like Mr. Bourne, yourself as the chairman, are all around the table. If this isn't the appropriate forum to discuss issues relating to this committee, please explain to me which is. And if you're trying to say a smoke-filled room in the back office of County Council is the best way to discuss these issues, I fundamentally disagree. This is the forum, and I won't speak for any longer than anybody else wants to speak. I'm happy to listen to Councillor Adair and Councillor Purdue-Horan, who have very rudely made personal attacks on me during this meeting. But as a 27-year-old, as the youngest member of this committee, it's me that's got to live with this a lot longer than a lot of you, with the greatest of respect, Mr. Chairman. But
Councillor Hollis, that's enough now, please. We all have grandchildren and children to look after in the future. So your comments are actually not very not right. Councillor, I think Councillor Adair now.
You can mute Councillor Hollis if you know you get the officers to do it.
Well, that's classic politics, Councillor Adair. If you don't like something, you can just mute them off. But it won't be you as deputy leader after the next election, Councillor Adair, just for that precise attitude. And I think your boss, who decides that climate change denier in Councillor Cox, I think it's an absolute disgrace that this committee is led by people like yourselves. An absolute disgrace.
Councillor Place, please come in, Sheila.
Can we get back to meeting, please,
yes,
instead of slagging everybody off?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your help. Okay, do we have any more questions or comments, please? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Palfreman, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And we'll now move on to the next item, which is investment performance. May I ask Tamsin Rabbits to introduce the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tamsin Rabbits and I'm the Investment Manager for the Pension Fund. Today I'm going to talk to you about the returns delivered by the fund's investments over the year to the 31st of March 2020 and how these investments are managed. The investment returns can be seen on slide 3. The equities, property and bonds figures indicate the performance against benchmark of our main asset classes. As everyone will be aware, the most recent year end took place amidst the outbreak of the COVID-19 global pandemic. This impacted global financial markets with significant volatility in valuations both before and after year end and increased the uncertainty of fair value assessments. Market activity was affected in many sectors with a material valuation uncertainty provision for property valuation, as the valuers did not consider that they could rely on previous market evidence to fully inform opinions of value at the valuation date. Performance at that date needs to be considered in the light of the market situation, but members should be reassured that significant recovery in overall equities has been experienced since year end. Despite this turmoil, the total fund return over 5 years to the end of March is still only slightly behind the assumed investment returns in the triennial valuation. Returns are generally behind the fund's strategic benchmark. This is mainly because our equities are less exposed to US markets, which have continued to be exceptionally strong, especially when the impact of exchange rates is taken into account. Slide 4 shows the main investment managers for the fund. Each quarter, the Pension Fund Committee reviewed the performance of the fund and received reports from each of the main portfolio managers. During most of the year, the fund retained a relatively simple structure of management arrangements with 2 main equity portfolios, the core index invested with Legal & General and Schroders, a bond mandate with Kames, and mainly direct property managed by Aberdeen Standard. However, in March, the corporate bonds were transitioned to LGPS Central as part of the LGPS pooling process, and these numbers are reflected in the figures above. After year end, the management of the gilts mandate was also transferred to LGPS Central. The specialist portfolio holds a number of pooled equity and property funds, as well as private equity and infrastructure. This portfolio is an area of growth as we seek to include additional alternative investments, especially infrastructure, to increase diversification and improve the returns of the fund overall. Each of the main managers has an individual benchmark against which their performance is measured. The fund's overall performance is then compared to its strategic benchmark and helps to inform decisions around the management arrangements. Slide 5 explains the fund's strategic benchmark. The strategic benchmark is built up of high-level market indices for different asset classes. The benchmark is based on the agreed asset allocation ranges. The fund's asset allocation is one of the key factors that the Pension Fund Committee determines, and this is recognised as the biggest driver of returns. The fund then decides how each asset class should be managed. For example, internal or external managers on a passive or active basis. The performance of the main managers is reported each quarter. In implementing the investment management of equities in particular, the fund has adopted an investment strategy that favours the UK over the US, and this is one reason for the divergence in returns of the portfolios from the strategic benchmark. A major review of asset allocation took place during the previous year, and the percentages shown are a summary of the result of this. These are long-term targets and it will take a while to move towards them. We'll now look at each of the portfolios in more detail. The graph for the core index is a good indication of how volatile the stock market can be, indicating that however good one year's results were, they may be significantly different in the future. There has been a significant recovery in the value of these investments in the current financial year. The Schroders portfolio is similarly volatile. Again, performance over the next 6 months has been substantially better. The Kames bond portfolio has delivered very stable returns, with only one of the last 10 years being negative. This year's figures are distorted by the moving of the corporate bond fund to LGPS Central in March. This does not detract from the performance Kames have delivered as managers of our fixed income portfolio. Since the market recovery in 2010, Aberdeen Standard's returns have been positive each year, despite the negative returns in the market in 1920. Aberdeen Standard's strategy is focused on ensuring durable long-term income, and this provides greater protection during market turbulence. Where future investments are made through the LGPS Central Asset Pool, decisions over manager selection will be made by the pool operator, but deciding on an appropriate investment strategy and asset allocation for the fund will still be done by the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee. This is the most important factor in driving long-term investment returns. The actual allocation at the 31st of March 2020 is shown on slide 10. So to summarise, valuations reduced at year end due to the market fluctuations caused by the global pandemic. As a result, the fund's net assets decreased during 1920. Equity returns are behind the fund's strategic benchmark, largely due to the lower weighting to US equities, which have performed exceptionally well. Despite last year's reductions, total returns over 5 years are only slightly behind the actuary's assumed return. And asset allocation is the most important factor in driving long-term investment returns. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. What that shows is that we have a balanced and diversified portfolio to take risk out of our investments. The key thing is that we could invest in single stocks. We could be buying, selling all that time, but the risk to that could compromise our future pensions of our members in future. So we have a balance of active and passive investments in equities. We have the bonds, and we also have property and other investments in infrastructure, etc., that you don't mention in detail here. And we do look at this regularly. And in fact, we're looking at the whole situation in the next week or two. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'll open it up to questions from members, please. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, it's just I'm curious about how are benchmarks established? Are they sort of abstraction, or are they do they flex with circumstances? For example, you know, the benchmark for this year, has it been flexed in order to account for COVID, or was it a sort of market abstraction at the beginning? Because we've underperformed on each one of the benchmarks by the looks of it. But so can we attribute it to the fact that the benchmark was an abstraction and circumstances changed, or is it that we've underperformed irrespective of conditions, which have been taken into account by the benchmark?
I think the benchmarks are there to be a comparator to the way that we're investing in that segment of it. Asset allocation. So, Tamsin, do you want to clarify that, please?
Yes. When you look at any of our individual managers, they have very specific benchmarks that we can directly compare their performance against. So you'll know that when we look at, for example, the Schroders analysis that comes through every quarter, and that the benchmark for that is explicitly set to reflect, for example, the regional allocations for that portfolio. However, when you come to summarise things for something like the AGM, we're then looking at asset groups across different portfolios managed in different ways. So it's much harder to come up with a benchmark that exactly mirrors the underlying assets. So, I mean, we could actually look at resetting the benchmarks every year for reporting purposes to accurately reflect the actual things we were invested in. But I don't know how much, that'd be quite a big piece of work, and I don't know how much value it would actually add. I think the important thing is monitoring the individual managers against benchmarks which are relevant to that portfolio.
Do you want to come back, Graham?
I think this is a question for another time, because we're going to get into sort of quite a lot of technical detail. So I think I'll probably have a conversation at some other point to get to the bottom of it. All right, thank you.
We can discuss that at the working group, Graham. That's
It's a good idea. How the benchmarks are set, how relevant they are. Thank you very much.
I have Mr. Needham. Terry, you want to come on?
Let me unmute.
You're on mute, Terry. Terry, you're mute. Terry, you're on mute. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. In the next few years, Tamsin, do you see any major changes in the way that investments are managed? I don't know, more in the core portfolio. Obviously, LGPS Central might take some of the assets, etc. Do we have more managers? Just a few thoughts.
Yeah, if I may. Yes, I think there's two questions there. One relates to our asset allocation, and we review that every year. We keep it under review, and that's one of the things we'll be discussing next week. And that would change how assets are allocated across different asset classes. As far as the management goes, that is also likely to change over the coming years as an increasing proportion of our assets are managed through LGPS Central as part of pooling.
How about the core portfolio? Do you see that increasing more sort of index based rather than people who say they can pick stocks better?
We're discussing that on Tuesday.
Okay. Opted out. Okay.
Everything's up for grabs on Tuesday, Terry.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, please? Okay, I don't see an. Councillor Hollis, please keep it brief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you don't give that same comment to any other member, but
no other councillors taking the amount of time today that you have. I'm just trying to make it fair to everybody. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, every other councillor has the right to speak equally as long as I, and I'm appointed in the same way as others. But we'll move on, because I think I agree with Labour member comments on not making personal attacks, even though I seem to have been the recipient of many this morning. My viewpoint on this is, and really a point of clarity, fully agree with you, Mr. Chairman, with regards to volatile individual shares, although I'm aware that the committee and the investment strategy is to have a small part of our portfolio in a more direct investment. But of course, most of it needs to be fluid and needs to be invested more securely. But do we intend on having investment strategies, i.e., to revert back to some of my original questioning, investments that we stay away from, i.e., things like arms, etc. I know we've done that already, but do we intend to expand things that we stay away from investing? And of course, my point really is, do we intend to avoid fossil fuels anytime in the near future? And my second question, how often is the investment strategy reviewed? Do we do it annually, biannually? And really, how flexible are we with change? And how long would it take us to change a strategy? Probably more bluntly is my question. So if this committee was to take a decision to change investment strategy, how long would it really take to implement those changes, Tamsin? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we review our investment strategy every year. We can review it more often if we choose to do so. In fact, just a couple of years ago, the markets had been particularly volatile, and Councillor Kerry requested that we brought that review forward to make sure we had the most appropriate investment strategy. The second part of your question as to how long it would take to implement any change is much more complicated, because that depends on the nature of the change. Obviously, the pension fund is very large and moving large amounts of money around, especially where we're trying to invest them in less liquid investments. It takes time.
Thank you, Tamsin. Okay, Tom, your hand's raised. Can you lower it if you finish, please? Thank you. I don't see any other raised hands. So, Tamsin, thank you very, very much for your presentation. We'll now move on to item number 8, which is pensions administration. So I'd like to ask John Clues and Sarah Stevenson to deliver that presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce myself, I'm John Clues, Pensions Admin Manager, and I've got a few slides just to take you through some of the activities that the pension admin have been doing, and I will pick up at the end just a little bit about COVID and the impact on the fund and some things that Barry mentioned earlier on his presentation. But for now, just to remind you that these figures are for 2019-20, and we finished off the year with the valuation, which we completed at the 31st of March 2020, and all the contribution rates were issued to all the scheme employers. So that puts finished off that particular year. In context, the scheme membership continues to grow. We've been doing a lot of consolidation with academy trusts, and we've now got a number of trusts requesting to come into the pension fund from other geographical locations, as a number of trusts within Nottinghamshire consolidate some of their membership. So that's going to be an ongoing activity over the coming year, and we've had 2 meetings about 2 rather large trusts actually last week and this week. The pension regulator continues to require funds to work on improving fund data, and again, we'll pick that up further on, and Sarah's going to talk a bit about that, but it's an important part of pensions administration, and will also feed into new legislation where the pension fund will have to provide data to the national database and portal for pensions, and where people will be able to look at their pensions data, and that's going to be around 2022 onwards. Pensions administration continues to increase the number of processes that we're completing, and that really goes hand in hand with page 3 in terms of just showing the number of actives, deferreds and pensioners that we have in the scheme, with a total of 142,000 within those groups. I always like at the AGM to really show pension fund performance and activity, which includes scheme employers, because a significant amount of work is undertaken by the fund aligned with scheme employers. And one of the biggest pieces of work that we do is the year-end work, balancing the year-end activity to enable certain activities to take place. And I'd just like to show you on slide 4 that 2019-20, we had 304 submissions received by submission date, which is was this last year was the 14th of May. Of accurate submissions, there were 206, and we've had so the percentage is 88% of those received by the deadline, and percentage accuracy is 60%. This has actually increased over the years, as you can see. We've done a lot of work with scheme employers to try and ensure that information is in on time and accuracy is improved. We are actually writing out to a number of scheme employers this week to send them bills on additional work that the pension fund had to undertake to complete their year-end activity. But like I say, they'll be getting those over the coming days. Just in terms of the data that we received, We were able to meet our statutory deadlines, and we issued all our annual benefit statements. Our deferred went out in July, and we issued 42,000. Our actives we issued in August before the 31st of August deadline, and that was 38,000. And then we had a catch-up of 797 statements due to following clarification of data with scheme employers. So we actually met our statutory deadline, and that's been reported to the pensions regulator. Also in November, we completed some further valuation data to the government actuary. That was provided in November, and that looks at data quality and helps with the LGPS scheme valuation across all funds. So moving on to number 6, just in terms of compliance. So as I said, we've met all our statutory requirements. Overall quality and timeliness has improved. We have offered support and advice to scheme employers. And as I said, we will send out notifications. Just moving on to number 7, is just and getting on to our performance. I'd just like to show the committee the cost per member for the fund, it being 14.08, and the average cost across the SITFA benchmarking group, and that includes a number of LGPS funds. The average is around £20 per member. So just moving on to number 8, slide 8. I've got 2 slides which really show the performance of administration across a number of main processes within the year 2019-20. I haven't got this year's performance yet. We'll be doing that over the next couple of months, but as you can see, we've been pretty consistent. We do have to move resources around to meet certain activities in terms of retirements and year-end activity, so it does have some impact. Deferments are slightly down, and that's because of the numbers that we do get. So there is, in terms of the worst performances around divorce settlements, and that generally is always the case because of data that we have to get and request, and it's one of those activities where we don't get many, and we have to, like I say, have a lot of interaction with individuals to get data to enable to do the calculation. So performance is quite down on that, but generally I think performance has been pretty good. Just in terms of sorry, I've lost my place a little bit. So what I'd like to also say is that we have had a number of challenges over the year within the emergency, and the pension fund has continued to function and prioritise its payments and benefits, and to ensure that we've met our statutory requirements in what is a challenging environment. What Barry talked about deaths, and from a pension administration point of view, we have seen the fund track the deaths in terms of increases. So we look, if I give you November's deaths that we've recorded, we had 136 deaths in November compared to 2019 deaths of 77, and that's been very much similar as the trends have worked through the year. We haven't got December's yet, but I do know that we've hit around 102 deaths as reported at, I think it was the 6th of January, and there's generally a lag. So we can see that increasing. So it is having an impact on administration, as well as how Barry explained it in terms of the fund itself. One of the other things that has also happened is we've seen an increase in deferred members seeking access to pensions early. And that's where clearly, and I think a lot of funds have seen that as well, where members have wanted to get at their pensions. The pensions regulators have also been warning funds and members around pension scams, and that's been one of its, I suppose, issues to ensure that members aren't being scammed out of their pensions in these troubling times. And just finally, and Sarah's going to we'll pick up a couple of these in more detail, but in terms of planned activities, we're continuing to do a lot of work around our pensions payroll reconciliation, which is required by the pensions regulator. Data improvement plan activities are continuing, and the pensions committee agreed additional resources for those. Barry mentioned about the implementation of McLeod and the McLeod judgment. We are going to be going out to scheme employers over the coming months for collection of data, and we will be writing to them to seek their support in the collection of this data. The pension fund has been involved in the public sector exit cap, and we've been advising scheme employers on how that should be implemented pending a change in the local government regulations. We're still continuing on with our guaranteed minimum pension reconciliation with HMRC, and we're hoping soon to be able to report back to committee on the cost of that in terms of changes to members' data. And also the employer portal has been rolled out, and we're rolling out it further to other scheme employers over the coming year. So there's some of the administration that we've been doing. So if anybody's got any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you very much, John, for all that detail in there. I do appreciate the challenging times that you've had during the year. And interesting to note that your costs per member is still at that very low rate. Well done. And I'm sure that we're going to be hearing a lot more from Sarah shortly about the transformation and the communication with employers. Any members have questions? I think I've got Councillor Hollis. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think really just to congratulate Jonathan on the work he does. I mean, not only is this a great presentation, but I think we all know when you're dealing with such a complex piece of work like managing not only personal data, but keeping track of people's addresses, all the very clerical stuff that I think we can often forget as a committee. It's an absolutely fantastic operation. And I think really just in line with my previous opinions, I am slightly worried that Jonathan's probably modest with the struggle he does face. And I'd seriously hope that if more resources are needed, which I know that in past committees we've granted, it's clear to me that we're substantially below benchmarks of our peers. So I certainly don't think investment in the staff and infrastructure of the resource behind Jonathan's team would be an oversight. So I'd certainly hope that any effort we can do to bolster his team is being given. Like I say, particularly with things like the McLeod judgment, I think, which I can only imagine puts very great stress on his team. But so I suppose my two questions really for yourself, Chairman, and Jonathan directly are, what are technological improvements doing to help you in your endeavours? I know we're obviously rolling out the portal. Is that taking out time, or is it really an extra time for your team? And secondly, Jonathan, in an ideal world, more continue with some of the work you're doing, because I'm looking at some of these statistics and thinking we are behind on some of the KPIs.
Yep.
And also, I'm only going to imagine that the McLeod judgment won't be the only pitfall that we face going forward, with quite a complex legal judgments coming forward. But that's my concern. My concern really is that we're under-resourced, and I'd hope that if you do need something, with the committee, certainly I am open to listen to what you need. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll come in first on that. We meet regularly to discuss what resources are required to get the job done, and the job done well. You'll see, actually, I think you need to understand a little bit more from the details from Sarah's presentation on transformation about the way that we're using technology to go forward. So I'll leave that one for now. Do you want to come back at all on that, Jonathan?
Just to say, thank you, Councillor Hollis. Just in terms of the portal, that will help because it'll improve processes in terms of how we get data into the pension fund. So we are hoping that that will reduce the paper and scanned documents being passed to and fro from scheme employers. So yes, that is going to be a benefit. Obviously, what the next sort of plan will be is to get a members portal where members can enact some of the processes through online access. And Sarah's going to pick up on that, but that's in our plan for the future. I mean, the pensions regulators require us to become more digital anyway, and we have got other plans to try and enable some of that to happen. But data is the most important and critical factor for any pension fund, and we're working on that continuously.
Yeah. Okay. Was Mike Pringle? Was your hand up there?
Thanks, Chairman. If I can wait till, I didn't realise Sarah was going to speak as well. Can I?
Yeah. Okay.
Wait,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, Chair. I think Councillor Moore has got his hand up.
Okay, Councillor Moore. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a fairly simple question. I'm very pleased with the admin and to hear the statistic. I think it's run extremely well. You did talk that the pension fund keeps growing.
Yeah.
You're obviously taking on lots of academies, various people like this.
Yeah.
First, two questions. First of all, are we taking on people who do not live in Nottinghamshire because they belong to an academy trust which goes overboard? And is it a strategy to grow the pension fund in terms of numbers?
Right. I'll answer that. So thanks, Councillor Moore. Any fund or any multi-academy trust can apply to move to other funds if they have assets and liabilities within those funds. So there are a number of large MATs in Nottinghamshire who are consolidating. They have a number of schools across the borders in Derbyshire, Leicestershire, and some further afield, and they can apply to the Secretary of State to request they bring those into our fund. We have the right to be consulted on that, but generally if the Secretary of State states that they're going to allow that to happen, then the fund has to take those members and their liabilities and assets as well. So it's more of it's not a strategy by us, it's just we seem to be quite popular at the moment in terms of multi-academy trusts wanting to bring their academies under our umbrella.
And I'll just add to that, obviously, that shows that actually people respect the work we do and people want to come in and join our fund. I think it's a very positive thing. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Any other questions or comments, please? Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, just to come back on what Jonathan said with regards to the members portal, which I think really seems to be a common sense. I mean, even I don't think my own grandmother would mind me saying that she's very awful with technology in the past, but certainly recent months she's now very tech savvy and uses everything online. So I think really bearing in mind the demographic of our members ever changing, people do know how to use the internet. And actually, as I think Jonathan made clear in his statement, they actually prefer it. And of course, we prefer it as well, a lot less admin. And hopefully we can bring some of the costs down in line or at least invest in other ways. But my question is, how long do we think that's going to take to bring up to speed? Because I know we are struggling or currently going through the employment portal.
Yeah.
And secondly, are we working with the county council with regards to our investment in technology? Obviously, we're lucky to have Councillor Adair with us today. He's obviously the technology champion for Nottinghamshire County Council. So I do hope that we're pulling on his knowledge and resource with the county council infrastructure as well. But yeah, so when is it going to be up and running?
Sarah Stevenson will be talking more about the transformation. I'm sure she can respond to those questions.
Just to answer one of those points. Just in terms of infrastructure, the pension fund has its own pensions administration system, which sits on the county council infrastructure. But we manage the pension fund manages itself in conjunction with IT, but generally through the pension administration provider. We work with them on updates and improvements on the system, i.e. Portals, etc. The big thing for us is to ensure that our data is correct first before we move on to a portal. And once we've completed our pensions data improvement, we'll then push out onto a portal, because we need to make sure that our data is correct. We don't want to be showing people incorrect data. So it's an iterative process moving on. So that was one reason for the data improvement programme, so that we can move to a portal.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I don't see any more hands raised, so thank you very much for your presentation and your response to those questions.
Okay, thank you.
So would like to invite Sarah to do a transformation presentation, please.
Thank you, Councillor Kerry. So yes, this presentation is to do a further update on the programme that we have running, which is transforming pension administration through digital development and new ways of working. So some of the background to this, I know John's covered off some of these points. There now is a stipulation, expectation from the regulator to enable scheme employers and members to interact via digital platforms. Committee will be aware that they approved the scope of a digital development programme in September 2019 and some additional data work in September 2020. I think if we can think of positives coming out of COVID-19, which is often quite difficult to do, I think one of the things that it's really highlighted to us is the need to progress the move to digital pension services. And I think certainly across the population and our own membership, people are becoming much more tech savvy, looking at how they can self-service themselves online. So I think obviously our programme is to enable scheme employers and members to self-service, to reduce the need for hard copy documents that are scanned into the system, require checking, and often require sending back to people because they've missed information, but also to ultimately reduce any face-to-face contact going forward. As you've heard from John this morning, one of the key foundations to our programme is about data. The regulator requires all funds to have an improvement plan, and committee will know through the approval that they've given that we've had a programme and a plan running for an amount of time now. The first couple of phases are now complete. In conjunction with our systems partner, we developed over 430 data validation checks covering both common and scheme-specific data. So the common data is names, addresses, dates of birth. Scheme-specific information is such as service history, changes in hours, earnings, those types of things, which are ultimately used to calculate members' benefits. Those 430 checks will run across over 173,000 pension folders, which equals just over 134,000 members. You'll also see that the membership is growing from John's slides. We obviously have a number of members that have more than one employment, which is then obviously within the fund as well. And we have also now completed the forensic analysis of that phase. We are in the midst of the data resolution phase. So after having run the audit, we've currently got something in the region of 500,000 data validation amendments that we need to look into. From last year's year end and the loading of those year end returns, it's already addressed 140,000 data amendments. And we're now working with our supplier to develop and implement bulk data resolutions, and those aspects are underway. However, we're going to need to interact directly with scheme employers and individual members, and we will be running a host of engagement sessions with scheme employers. As you know, we currently have a year-end return, so often we are not alerted to changes in data until that time when we collect it. So obviously we're going to look to go back to scheme employers for them to verify and add in specific information. And ultimately, we may need to go back to individual members to clarify pieces of information. Working with our partner, we do have a series of data dashboards, so we're now able to drill down and look at the individual data scores for individual employers, and ultimately this is something that we will look to report into committee and update our admin strategy. And I think that will be a way of being able to benchmark our scheme employers going forward, and also enable us to direct our employer support and compliance resource to support those scheme employers that may require more support. That phase is going to take several months to run and rectify. We think that will take really this next calendar year. Obviously, with the county council being the host for the administering authority, we obviously are able to go to them, and we have been piloting some of our engagement sessions with those teams so that we can actually address any questions and issues and formulate that engagement session ahead of actually going out to other scheme employers. Ultimately, we will move into a data quality maintenance phase as well, because clearly we're making a significant investment in data improvement. We then don't want to slip back, in that we want to keep stepping forward. And that's really where a move to monthly returns will help us. Currently, the year-end return creates a significant peak of work within the administration team. A number of LGPS funds have already moved to monthly returns. Obviously, we are engaged with a number of funds to understand their experience and to learn the lessons that they, have learned from doing that to shape our plan going forwards. And the key thing that comes out from other funds that have moved to monthly returns is complete your data audit, get your data improvement completed so that you're starting from a solid foundation. So there's a number of dependencies across our programme with that key foundation of data improvement. But the monthly returns then will mean that obviously month 12 just becomes another month through the year. So we will be always a month rather than potentially up to 12 months behind on new starters, leavers and any changes. And that's about using the automation within the system, using the technology. Monthly returns will have a series of validation checks, and files will not be able to be submitted with errors on them. They'll remain with the scheme employer, the owner of the data, to correct those before submission into our fund, and hopefully this will then build on the good work that we're doing about data improvement, but also then the activities of working and really, as you would call it, sweating the asset of our system going forward. The Scheme Employers Portal, we've talked a little bit about that this morning. That is running in parallel with the data phase. It is a secure portal for the interaction of between employers and the fund. Clearly, we've been through the relevant processes with the information governance team and ICT security to ensure that it complies to all the requirements around the secure transmission of data. The pilot with the County Council is now complete, and people within the County Council, within the HR department now, are submitting online death in service, ill health retirement, flexible retirements, and have a limited view of their members' records. Clearly, they are not undertaking the transactional activity, but they can view records. And we're now just rolling out requests for estimates into the County Council. We've started and had engagement with a number of district and borough councils and two large educational employers, and they will be the next on our list to roll out the employers portal, and then gradually we will roll out to all remaining employers. So we are building the project plan as we speak to do that rollout, and we are working for that rollout to occur through this next year. The members portal, clearly, you know, this is something very much that we see as being a benefit to both the members, but also to the administration team. Clearly, we have a team of very experienced pension administrators, and we now need to move to really administration by exception, moving away from having paper coming in, paper application forms, where we're having to check information on the form, send it back. We need to move to online submission, where again, there are validation checks built into the system. So if somebody hasn't put in various dates, the system will prompt them that they can't move on, using address checkers, putting in a postcode, picking an address from an approved address gazetteer, letting people update their own personal data as well. We're all used to doing that in all sorts of walks of life now. Moving to online pay slips, P60s, that type of information. I think, again, the key thing here is good quality data is key. If the data for the member is not held on their record and isn't correct, if they start to initiate an online process and it gets to a point mid-process where it can't progress because the data is missing, then that activity would drop back into the office, and that really defeats the object then of us moving to online processes and being able to really use our experts within the office to obviously look at more complex and unusual cases. You know, they are currently, you know, a finite group of resources, although we do have apprenticeships coming through to that team. Other things that John and I will be looking at are developing professional training and development qualifications for our team to attain, but also having an active apprenticeship programme. Clearly, we have to look at that team and the succession planning that we have in place, but also having to run alongside that transformation so that we get the right bits of either technology or people doing the right parts of a process going forward. So the members portal, we had hoped we would have progressed, you know, further, have progressed further by now, but I think, you know, it's really come home to us about the quality of the data and the improvements we need to make there. But we are, again, in the backgrounds, in discussion with our system provider, looking at how we do scope up that work, what we would turn on first, etc., how we would roll that out. So some background work is being done, but I hope at the next update to committee I'll be able to come with some firmer information about dates for you on that. And that's where we are with transformation. It's key to the administration of our fund going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I mean, we've been working on this for a while now, and we've had the plan. The plan seems to be working well. Obviously, testing times, COVID. That's the key is your feeling about employers and how they're responding to your request for help in getting this thing done ASAP and effectively. I have a question from Councillor Chapman first, please.
Actually, when I put my hand up, I think a couple of answers have come through since, but it's really, I mean, with all IT transformation, there's a hell of a lot of risk. And you mentioned a couple to do with employees and quality of data, but what are your biggest risks? What could go wrong, or have you capped them all off?
I think obviously we have a risk log and an issues log running. I think because a number of funds are ahead of us, we've been able to use their experience and their lessons, particularly with monthly returns. You know, what comes out from those that have already done it is make sure you've improved your data first. So if we don't improve our data first, then I think that is our key risk, because it will knock on to all the other component parts of this programme. So I think it's data, I think it's engagement with scheme employers. I have discussed with Councillor Kerry, him supporting us in fronting some of that communication out to scheme employers. But obviously I would ask other members of the committee that represent other organisations that obviously you support us through your own organisation doing their returns, and that perhaps you know, we may be able to come to you if we're having any particular issues, so you could support us to move that forward for the benefit ultimately of the entire fund.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Councillor Hollis, I think your hand's up again. Hello? Oh, hands down. Okay.
So I think it was legacy hand. Thank you.
No problem. Councillor Pringle, please. Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, 2 points, please, Chairman, if I may. First of all, I think Jonathan and Sarah need to be recognised for the work. It's only, you know, a couple of 3 years ago we were struggling to get employers to fill in forms. These two have worked wonders from what I can see. I recognise that the changes are going to be difficult and hard, but you know, we've moved on so far to talking about apprenticeships within the department, development of members within the department, and this has been driven by Jonathan and Sarah. So, yeah, they really should be appreciated and recognised for the efforts within that, because I'm sure if it was going wrong, we'd be the first people to put his hand up and point the finger. So, in the fact that it's going right, it should be applauded and recognised by the committee, and I'm sure you're aware that we all do recognise that. Just one point on the meeting today, Chairman, if I can, which I wasn't going to speak on, but as I am, you all know that the Labour Group support the divestment issue away from fossil fuels into green energy and will support any acceleration. However, the suggestion that it's only spoken about in meetings is completely wrong, because our officers, Tamsin, Keith, and including William, have answered numerous of my queries, some of them which, you know, they might think I'm a little bit daft in asking. But in recognising my feelings and feelings of members of the committee as to where we should be going, they have answered it as truthfully and as honestly as they can, as far as I'm concerned. Even when I've challenged their answers, they've come back to us. So they should be applauded and again recognised for the way that they respond to members in general and not just in meetings. I was really sad to hear, I'm not going to mention names, but I was sad to hear members attacking other members and other members, certain members, politicising a candidate for their own benefit. That's not what this committee is about. And I was shocked in many ways to hear that. And in fact, as we talk about divestment, to hear that sort of negativity between members, if I was a member of the public, I would have no confidence in what's going forward. So I hope members will refrain from that in the future. But look, in general, you know where we stand, you know where I stand on this, but I think our officers at this AGM deserve some recognition for the effort and the way that they respond to us. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very, very much, Mike, for that. Your sentiments are well appreciated. We do thank our officers all the time. We turn up at the meetings, we do the work behind the scenes, and we do that. But it's very good of you to do that in this public forum today at the AGM. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Okay, are there any other questions or comments, please? I've got Councillor Hollis's hand up again. Is that a legacy, Councillor Hollis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may briefly come in, I think just to join the sentiments of Councillor Pringle there with regards to the officers, I know I've obviously congratulated Jonathan, but also with Sarah, I think it's clear that the efforts are moving in the right direction with the back office staff, and it's certainly something that our group, the Ashfield Independents, support. And like I've said previously, I'd only say that it's clear to me that we potentially need more resource going forward, and our group certainly supports enhancing the back office. But I think just to turn to some of Councillor Pringle's comments, of course, it's good to hear him say that he supports divestment and the change in strategy. But of course, when it comes to the proof in the pudding, when Labour members had a chance to second the motion that I put forward calling for just that divestment, his group sadly refused to not only second it, but then chose to vote in favour of the committee, and that was only within the last 12 months. So while I really welcome, and Councillor Pringle knows personally we get on very well, and outside the council and many other issues we work together very closely on, but if he is going to claim that his group supports such a move, then I'd only ask him to join with me and publicly put that on record and not wait any further. And the olive branch is there to you, Councillor Pringle. I would gladly work with you to present a motion at the very next pension committee calling for divestment within the time frame that you can support. I would support immediately. I know your group potentially might want a longer time frame. But let's work together on putting a motion together that we will present together at the next pensions committee. Well, thank you, Chairman, for allowing me just to come back on Councillor Pringle's points. But with regards to this agenda item, fantastic work for the officers, and long may it continue the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollis, and I look forward to hearing your comments at the working party, where we'll all look at the issue of divestment and our future investment strategy, and look at all the details and hopefully come up with the right decisions. Okay, Sarah, thank you very much for that. That's the end of the presentations. I'd like to move on to item number 9, which is the questions, and I'd like to ask Tamsin Rabbits and Keith Palfreman to take us through the questions and answers, please.
Thank you, Chair. We've had 21 questions submitted to the Pension Fund for answer at the AGM. Many of these are on similar themes. Given the volume of questions, some of these are being grouped together and will be answered together in this meeting, but all questions submitted will be published on the Pension Fund website with individual responses. We start with a question from Nottingham City Council, one of the biggest employers in the fund, from Councillor Sally Longford. Nottingham City Council has declared a climate and ecological emergency and is committed to being carbon neutral by 2028. On behalf of the many employees of the City Council, partner organisations and citizens of Nottingham who are concerned about the impact of their pension fund on climate change, and given the decreasing financial performance of fossil fuel related investments, I would like to ask that the pension fund agree to consult with its members on a divestment strategy and timeline before the next AGM in order to ensure the long-term sustainability of the fund and to play its part in the prevention of catastrophic climate change. There were 6 similar questions and we will respond to these together.
The pension fund shares the concerns of Nottingham City Council about climate change. Climate action failure is the standout long-term risk the world faces in likelihood and impact, according to the 2020 Global Risks Report from the World Economic Forum. How companies manage climate-related transition and physical risks and opportunities is highly likely to affect long-term profits and company returns. Policymakers' response equally so. We therefore actively debate how the fund, alongside other like-minded investors, can best encourage a broad transition towards a low-carbon economy. We have discussed divestment at length, particularly over the last few years, most recently at a working party in 2020 to discuss the climate risk analysis report procured from LGPS Central. From these and previous discussions, we have concluded that divestment is a less effective strategy than engagement at delivering beneficial outcomes, as well as being less consistent with our fiduciary duty to pension fund members. Engagement remains a more powerful and more effective tool that we use both at corporate, industry and policy levels to influence not just individual company behaviour, but the rules of the game. By the same token that we ask companies to align their businesses with the Paris Agreement, we ask policymakers to take policy action that will facilitate the transition to a low-carbon economy. As an example of the latter, our pool company, LGPS Central, has co-signed on our behalf letters to the EU and UK leaders asking for a green recovery from the health pandemic. Importantly, focusing on the exclusion of oil and gas companies ignores the impact that other companies have on climate change. Almost every business in the world, to some extent, depends on the use of fossil fuels and will do so for some time to come. Selling shares in oil and gas companies will not make real-world changes to greenhouse gas emissions. Indeed, it could be counterproductive. It requires systemic change across many industries and governments to make the impact required to limit global warming. We believe there needs to be corporate change across a wide range of sectors, which in our view is more likely with an engagement strategy. Many companies seek out investors for their views on decarbonisation plans and strategies. Our investment strategy statement, therefore, continues to state that the pension fund believes that a strategy of engagement, i.e. working from the inside to influence company behaviours, rather than exclusion, is more compatible with fiduciary duty and will lead to a better outcome in terms of climate change. We note that most other LGPS funds and major pension funds take this view. If Nottinghamshire Pension Fund were to sell its fossil fuel holdings to another less engaged investor, the pressure on those companies would reduce, with potentially a negative impact on carbon emissions and speed of transition. The fund actively influences companies by engagement through our investment managers and LAPF, and by exercising our voting rights. Our pooling company, LGPS Central, is an active member of a collaborative engagement called Climate Action 100+. Climate Action 100+ engages 161 companies across the globe that are responsible for 80% of industrial carbon emissions globally. The initiative builds on a simple but powerful logic. If you engage and influence the highest emitters, you influence whole sectors, markets, and the global economy. Climate Action 100+ is currently being ramped up through a benchmarking project. All companies are asked to set an explicit target of net zero emissions by 2050 and to provide verifiable evidence that this will be achieved in the short, medium, and long term. This introduces an element of nowhere to hide, and investors will be able to assess companies' progress relative to sector peers and across the board.
Thank you. We've also had a question from Nottingham City Council Energy Projects team, which also asks about divestment plans and consulting members. This includes the comment, Energy Services understand that the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund has no investments in sustainable, low carbon or renewable energy equity funds.
The implication that the fund has no investment in renewable energy or sustainable investments is not true. Over the past 15 years, the fund has made investments in a range of listed investment trusts and private funds whose model is partially or wholly based on sustainable investments. Examples are the Renewable Investment Group, Impacts Environmental Markets Trust on the listed side, and Green Investment Offshore Wind Bank on the private side. In addition, our two main active managers have carbon footprints of 58% and 31% respectively of their benchmarks, showing that they also pay attention to investing sustainably. We expect, subject to due diligence, to make a significant allocation to a sustainable equity mandate when LGPS Central has one available. We gave our reasons previously why one of our investment beliefs stated in our investment strategy statement is that engagement is a more appropriate response than divestment and more likely to lead to a better outcome in terms of climate change. We emphasise again that in doing this, we are aligned to the great majority of pension funds around the world who have a fiduciary duty to members. We discuss this issue at committee on a regular basis, but at the moment there are no plans to divest from fossil fuels. We understand the request to consult members or employers. If the fund were planning to make an investment or divestment for non-financial reasons, it would have to have good reasons for believing that fund members shared its belief. As the fund has not invested or divested for non-financial reasons, there is no requirement at this stage to hold a consultation, which carries a significant cost. We note also that the fund is not bound by the results of a consultation, though it should take them into consideration. To summarise, we share the questioner's ambitions that the pension fund should invest in a way which is consistent with mitigating climate change, and we are actively pursuing that strategy. However, we do not share their view that divesting from fossil fuels is the most effective way of achieving that.
Thank you. We've received a question from Mr. Patrick Hort about our climate risk analysis modelling. Since we are agreed that minimising average temperature rises is the goal, and since 1.5 degrees represents less warming than 2 degrees but was not modelled, please can you tell me when a risk analysis of 1.5 degrees will be made available to the committee? And there were 3 similar questions and we'll respond to these together.
The pension fund takes the financial risks of climate change very seriously and commissioned LGPS Central to deliver a climate risk report, which was taken to committee in October. This analysis is supportive of the fund's current investment strategy in 3 ways. It demonstrates that minimised global warming is of benefit to the pension fund financially, which means the fund's financial interests are aligned with global environmental interests. It shows that the March 19 equity holdings were already below the market cap benchmark in terms of carbon footprint and weight of fossil fuel reserves, which indicates that the fund has been considering and managing climate risks. And it shows that as the fund progresses towards the long-term strategic asset allocation, these positions will further improve. LGPS Central uses an external service provider to conduct the climate scenario analysis for the climate risk reports. The service provider considers its 2 degrees C scenario to be aligned with the commitments of the Paris Agreement. The direction of travel is more important than the target in order to achieve a better outcome. And we will continue to monitor carefully the development of climate change science, both in its modelling of different scenarios and the impact they may have on the world and ultimately for the fund's financial investments. At the time of the tendering process, data limitations meant the service provider had not yet developed a 1.5 degree scenario. It is likely that a 1.5 degree scenario will be developed by the service provider in due course as climate change integrated assessment models are updated to consider such a scenario. In future climate scenario analysis, LGPS Central will consider a 1.5 degree C scenario if data quality and models permit.
Thank you. We have received a question from Nicholas Pearson. In October 2020, South Yorkshire Pension Authority voted to make its investment portfolio carbon neutral by 2030 and asked officers to produce a route map for this in 6 months. Given the environmental and financial risks of continuing with fossil fuel and other high carbon investments and the massive investment opportunities in low carbon and renewable energy industries, can I ask when Nottinghamshire Pension Fund will be setting a similar target?
We agree with the aspiration to reduce carbon emissions, and the climate risk analysis we undertook in 2020 demonstrates that by showing that our active equity manager's carbon footprint is around half that of the benchmark. However, we have to balance this desire with all the other objectives which the pension fund is obliged to follow, most notably our fiduciary duty to members. We cannot allow one goal to dominate everything. A core investment principle is to allocate in a considered way on the basis of robust data. If we use unreliable data, we may end up with a poor outcome. Carbon data scoring is still a young industry in the process of development, and while the data provides useful insights, there are a number of limitations. For example, little attention is paid to Scope 3 emissions, i.e. by the user, and much data provided by companies is neither audited or standardised. As climate-related data quality and availability improves, more reliance can be placed on that data. We anticipate that as we implement our long-term investment strategy, we will reduce carbon emissions from the portfolio and will continue to review target setting as part of the overall climate risk monitoring we will be undertaking on an ongoing basis. This will be done alongside continuing robust ESG integration into investment decisions by our investment managers and active and responsible stewardship, that's engagement and voting, of the assets we hold.
Next, we have a question from Sue Malander. Fires in the Amazon and Pantanal region of Brazil, driven by illegal logging and cattle ranching, are increasing carbon emissions, damaging carbon sinks, and destroying some of the most biodiverse areas of the world. Does the pension fund have an investment policy on preventing deforestation? What concrete action is being taken to prevent deforestation associated with its investments?
Through our pooling company, LGPS Central, and our main equity managers, Legal & General and Schroders, we engage on the long-term investments risks inherent in deforestation, both at policy and company levels. We recognise the crucial role that tropical forests play in tackling climate change and protecting biodiversity, which again has an impact on economic development and the stability and well-functioning of capital markets. As examples of concrete action taken recently, LGPS Central is on the advisory committee of an Investors Policy Dialogue on Deforestation initiative known as IPDD, which expects Brazilian authorities to halt and reverse deforestation while allowing investors access to data to monitor progress. This message has been communicated by investors over the last 4 to 5 months to the highest political levels, including to the Brazilian Vice President, the Governor of the Brazilian Central Bank, and members of the Brazilian Congress. IPDD will be a 2-year project that also aims to span other regions of the world that face deforestation risk. For Legal & General, tackling deforestation is recognised as a key element of achieving net zero emissions, and as such features significantly in the engagement of their investment stewardship team undertakes across a wide range of companies. Deforestation features as part of Legal & General's Climate Impact Pledge, as it is one of the issues they raise with companies in the relevant sectors and also with governments. Legal & General have been engaging with some of the largest food companies on tackling deforestation since 2016. In addition, they are publicly assessing 125 food companies on the strength of their deforestation policies. The lack of a deforestation policy may result in a vote against at the company's upcoming AGM. Schroders recognise that deforestation, changes in land use, increasing agricultural intensity, overpopulation, climate change and pollution contribute to biodiversity loss, and therefore take these factors into consideration in their ESG analysis of companies and engage with companies where they feel their practices are unsustainable.
Thank you. We have a question from Ben Humphrey about the climate risk training provided to the Pension Fund Committee. Did the training course on climate risk recently given to the Pension Fund Committee by LGPS Central include an explanation of the different impacts projected by the IPCC between heating of 1.5, 2, 3 and 4 degrees C? And if not, what actions are the committee prepared to take to familiarise themselves with impacts projected by the United Nations Environment Programme and by the IPCC?
The answer to the question is yes. The training course on climate risk recently given to the Pension Fund Committee by LGPS Central did include a section looking at estimates of the different impacts of varying degrees of temperature increase. Climate-related scenario analysis is an immature discipline. It is difficult modelling the impacts and implications on a multi-asset investment portfolio of an unprecedented global transition, which is in the process of being affected by governments around the world. It is the intention to repeat this analysis as the data and analytical tools evolve and the Pension Fund Committee will continue to receive training from LGPS Central.
A question from Julie Bristow relating to an article which appeared in the Financial Times last year. The article in the Financial Times refers to estimates compiled by environmental campaign group Platform London. We have not been provided with the basis on which these estimates have been calculated, so are unable to comment in detail on them. At a high level, the article estimates performance over a relatively short time frame, and it is not clear whether or not the article assesses performance on a total return basis, covering both share price and dividend payments. We've had a number of questions about investments in renewable energy and sustainable investments, particularly to replace fossil fuel investments. A number of questioners were under the impression that the pension fund has no investments in clean energy, which, as previously mentioned, is not correct.
As part of portfolio diversification, the pension fund has committed to an allocation of 8% to infrastructure, equivalent to over 440 million. Some of the investments already made are specifically in renewable energy funds, but the clean energy sector makes up a significant share of the infrastructure investment universe, so this constitutes a major proportion of our more general infrastructure funds. It should be noted that many other infrastructure investments, for example in public transport infrastructure, contribute indirectly to reducing the demand for fossil fuels. However, most of these infrastructure investments are made through private equity funds. This places them outside the scope of the climate risk analysis, which focuses on equity investments, as this is the only area where some reportable data exists. This is one of the limitations of this kind of analysis, and it's why it's not the only information considered by the pension fund in assessing its climate risk and its investment strategy. The pension fund states in its investment strategy statement an investment belief on the relevance of climate change for financial markets. In line with this belief, the fund actively looks for investments which can be expected to benefit as a result of the long-term impacts of climate change. Opportunities may also arise from the response of policymakers and potential disruption in the market. The fund will continue to look for investments that can be expected to benefit as a result of the current and long-term impacts of climate change and other global issues. More specific plans for the next financial year include the evaluation of sustainable equity investments, and the fund is working with LGPS Central to develop a sustainable fund. Over time, the pension fund's exposure to fossil fuels will reduce as a result of these diversification decisions as we implement our long-term investment strategy.
Thank you, Chair. That's the end of the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith and Tamsin. I'll open it up to any members, committee members, comments and questions, please. But please, again, please keep it brief. I mean, we've only just had a chance to listen to the answers, and there's a lot of information in there, and I hope that everybody will take those on board and digest them, and can come back and ask more questions when they've done that, please. So, Mike, please. Mike, was you put your hand up? No. Okay. I've got Councillor Hollis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the council for getting back to obviously many constituents and pensioners across Nottinghamshire in the questions. And I think it's obviously a big topic of the moment of this pension fund, and I think that strength of feeling, as I'm sure has come across in the level and frequency and detailedness of the questions of the constituents and fund participants that we manage this fund on behalf of. So it was good to hear the questions, and certainly good to hear the replies. Obviously, it's fair to say that some of the responses from officers I disagree with, particularly with regards to the fact that we want to be on the inside to change decisions. While I understand that logic, I think our very brand being inside those organisations, as I'm sure members of the City Council would agree with their question, commits our support to them by putting our brand in and our money inside those organisations. So I'd disagree with the strategy there. And then obviously with regards to Mr. Bourne's earlier comments, you'll recall that I asked him a question in item 6, and he, while describing his attitude to the climate change, he said that there wasn't the evidence on climate change and fossil fuels influence on it. He described as not robust and not clear, when people like that are making those statements in a very public and recorded setting, and of course they're the very advisors that you, Mr. Chairman, and other committee members rely on. I think whether he meant them in such a stronger way as he certainly said, it doesn't fill members of the public, and certainly people like the questioners and people with attitudes like myself towards divestment and investment in fossil fuels with much hope. So I seriously hope that the judgment of officers and lead members of this committee changes and brings us into line with the questioners and members of the public. And I think I'll finish my comments on saying that while I know sometimes politics is fraught, but ultimately we all have our opinions, outside of the meetings we'll all smile and as people get on, I'm sure. But in these settings, we are here as political individuals. This is a politically led committee that sits as a political organisation. Hence why we as councillors make the decision and not the officers. So that's my view. And like I say, I really thank the council for providing such detailed replies, albeit that I don't agree with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you, Tom. This is the first time in my experience that the Pension Fund Committee has become political, as you might term it. We've always operated and will continue to operate non-politically, take all the information that we can from whatever sources we have, think about it, discuss it, and try to understand it, get training, which most of us do turn up to, some of us don't, Tom, and help us to make the right decisions. I'll allow Mr. Bourne to come back to your question a little bit later, but first I've got Anne Peach. I think, Anne, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just firstly, it's a constitutional question about is there a reason, or is it just the way the Constitution's laid out, that we can't see the questions before the meeting? Because there obviously were quite a lot of questions there that could have been published with the agenda or even as a separate document on the website. But I realise that that might involve a constitutional change. I don't know. Secondly, yes, I'm looking forward to the pension working group next week. I'm not a voting member of this committee, but yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to speak. I do feel that, yes, there are a lot of questions being raised about climate change, fossil fuel, environment, environmental changes, etc. And I do want some more reassurance about our strategy, the strategy adopted by the committee of engagement rather than divestment, which obviously is a different strategy to the one that Nottingham City Council would like you to adopt. But I would like to see more feedback on how effective that strategy is. How do we monitor it? How do we monitor all the risks? And there is obviously a lot of feeling within the community and our residents. My inbox is absolutely chocker full of emails asking about divestment. How do we manage the expectations of the public, basically, because I don't feel the answer that we're giving them is actually being accepted as such. It's certainly not seeming to answer their questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll try and answer the first question. We accept questions in 7 days before. We obviously have to have time to get answers together. I absolutely agree that we ought to be able to do something, more open, whatever. But it's a timing issue. I'll ask the officers to come back on that about the Constitution. I think I'm right in what I'm saying. Mr. Ford or Mr. Barker?
Yeah, indeed, Chair. It is purely just a timing issue. Is to give officers here enough time to complete the answers. As you can appreciate, they can be quite detailed and raise quite difficult issues. So yeah, it's purely a timing issue that we would just try and get them ready in time for the meeting. And sometimes we do go right up to the wire with those answers.
Absolutely. And with the number of questions, obviously, we're getting on subjects and the complexity of it, the complexity of the questions does need to have a well-informed and well-reasoned answer. And it's not always as the answer to Mr. Bourne's, Mr. Bourne is going to come back to Councillor Hollis's question.
I'm not necessarily, Chair, I'm not necessarily looking for publishing the answers, which obviously will come out with time with the minutes. I would rather like to see the questions because, as you say, you do give a deadline for questions, and that should be enough to be able to publish the questions with the agenda. Thank you.
We'll take a look at that, Anne, I can assure you. Councillor Chapman, I think you're next.
I'm not going to get into the issue of staying in or coming out. I think there are arguments on both sides. What I am interested in is, in an age of alternative facts, getting facts right. And it is really important that that we do clarify what the real situation is. Now, there's obviously a couple of issues to be clarified, and one is that somehow we've lost a lot of money by staying in, by maintaining our investments in fossil fuels. We've had some answer on that, but I think that's really important that we hit that one on the head if it is the case. The second bone of contention is, that somehow it's got out and about that we are not investing at all in renewables, right? And I'm very disappointed that people have assumed that before asking questions, and they haven't found the answer before asking a question because it's been very, very easy to establish it. So that's the second one. And I've just heard, and I've got to say this to Tom, a misinterpretation of what William said. I mean, I listened to what he said, and Tom, it's a misinterpretation, right? It was not what William said, but I'm sure he'll be able to speak for himself. But we've got to stick with facts, and we've got to stick with what is real, because otherwise, if people who are using bad facts, right, undermine their case. And it's really important that we also, as members, get facts from our officers. But also, when there are facts, when there are alternative facts floating around, we need to rebut them quite rapidly, because otherwise it spreads. Thanks.
You're absolutely right, Graham. And we do get questions, other questions on a regular basis that we do try to answer. So whether or not they're taken on board or if somebody else is answering the question, I don't know. So we do try to do that. We do have information on the website about our strategies, our policies. We have minutes from the meetings that the regular committee meetings that we go to. We have working party reports. So yes, I believe we do a lot, but I take on board your comment that maybe we can try to do better. Thank you.
There's two issues. Have we lost money?
Sure.
Right? Have we lost money? And second, this issue about us not investing, which is clearly wrong. And irrespective of which way you think, it really is very, very important that we especially these days, we stick with what is accurate. Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. Do I have any more hands? William.
Right, thank you very much indeed. And Graham, thank you for kind of making the points you made. Just to be quite clear, I'm not denying that there's very strong evidence that some form of climate change is happening in any way at all. I absolutely agree, and I think we all agree with that. But the point sorry, Mr. Councillor Hollis is shaking his head.
Mr. Chairman, we don't all agree. The leader of the county council is a climate change denier, as outlined in only last week's Nottinghamshire Post article. Her colleague, Mr. Kerry, chairs this authority, and you act as a lead thing. And your exact words were that you said the evidence, no evidence. I mean, I'll quote. So just for Councillor Chapman, obviously this is a recorded meeting. Mr. Bourne, whether he misspoke, his exact words were there is no robust evidence, and the evidence is unclear about climate change.
Can I clarify?
Clarity would be appreciated.
Yeah. Okay, what I was talking about was when you are looking at a company and whether to invest in it, and remember it's mainly our managers doing this, not us doing this. We are looking at ESG, environmental, social and governance factors. It is the data on that area, particularly areas like carbon emissions, is not, there is some data, but it is not particularly robust. For example, none of the data provided by companies, and quite a lot of it is inevitably provided by the companies themselves, is not audited, it's not presented on a standardized basis. As Tamsin said, when you are looking at companies that are not quoted, it is very, very unclear what they're providing in some cases. There are companies which provide no data, so you have to decide what to do with them when you're making your decisions. There's also the issue, which I'm sure you'll be aware of, that scope 3 data, which is all very well measuring what a car manufacturer emits when they're actually building the car, but it's very hard to measure what the user is actually going to emit. And that is equally important in terms of better outcome. So that's what I mean when I say the data which we use or which our managers use, trying to assess a company's ESG risk is less than robust. And it doesn't mean it's got no value. It doesn't mean we can monitor it over time, but it does mean that it's not just unwise, it's dangerous to invest large parts of this fund on the basis of that data. Second point I'd just like to quickly pick up on is you mentioned that kind of Nottinghamshire's, our brand being invested in a company. I don't think it really works like that. When we invest in a company, we are, when the fund invests in a company, we're in a position to try and influence what it does. That doesn't necessarily mean we say, we're kind of a part of it in any way at all. And I think there's a misconception there, perhaps. Just turning to the issue of whether the fund has lost money. I mean, in one sense, because we have been overweight the UK, which has a heavy oil weighting, and also we've been overweight passive, where we have no choice whether to invest in oil or not. That is simply done by the index. In that sense, we would have done better not to be taken those two views. But at the Working Party next week, we are going to be examining exactly those points, saying, should we reduce it? And you can make the point that maybe we should have done this 5 years ago. Fair comment. But we have to decide things slowly and in the round rather than rushing into decisions. We might have made that decision 5 years ago and got it completely wrong.
Okay. Thank you very much, William, for that. And I think I don't see any more raised hands.
I think there's Councillor Simbiridis, Chair.
Oh, Harry.
He did have his hand up.
Yep. I can't see your hand, but please speak.
Chairman, I'm sorry but in the last speaker's question time, I put my hand up and I never been called.
I didn't see it. Sorry, the officers didn't tell me, Parry. I apologise.
Sorry, Councillor, I didn't see your hand.
I just wonder if I can repeat that question for Sarah, actually, Sarah Stevenson. Is that possible to do that? Or forget it?
Yes, please ask the question.
Okay, Sarah, the previous presentation you made, you mentioned about investment in technology. If I understood right, and I think personally, or as a member of the pension committee, will be premature to invest more money in technology because of COVID-19, hoping won't be last very long. Thank you.
Sarah, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, I just really wanted to clarify, is this investing in technology for the investment of the fund or the investment we're doing in technology to support the administration of the pension benefits?
Do you want to respond, Parry? But I think it's about the investment in technology and transformation that Parry's talking about.
Yeah, I'm talking in a long term.
Long term. Well, we have a pension administration system that is procured through the appropriate channels. Obviously, these systems have all sorts of modules available to them. And obviously, we're constantly reviewing our systems. We are looking at new modules, such as those that I've described today. Other things we're looking at are things like chatbots, which a number of organisations use now, a bit like a web chat, that type of thing. We're looking at modules where we can do online identity checks and verifications of birth certificates and marriage certificates, etc. So we're constantly looking at what's coming onto the market and what would be of benefit to our members and to the fund, and obviously the efficiency of the administration of the Nottinghamshire Fund.
Does that answer your question, Parry?
Okay, Chair, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more hands. We do understand climate change risk in this pension fund. We are working on it. We'll continue to work as information gets clearer, better, etc. So please don't doubt that, Tom. We do. So all I can say, it's been a very long and interesting meeting, a very good AGM. Thanks to the officers for all the hard work they've put in, both pre the meeting and during it. Thank you all for coming along. Thank you all for watching, everybody out there in the public, and hope to see you at the next one. So thank you very much and cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
And I
Chair.
hope this year is better than last year.
Yes, summer COVID. Well done. Keep safe, everybody. Keep safe.
This winter, more than ever, with COVID-19 still circulating, we need help to reduce all avoidable risks. You can help protect the NHS, social care and loved ones by getting the flu vaccine. You may be eligible for the free vaccine at your GP or local pharmacy if you are over 65, pregnant or have a long-term condition. Find out if you are eligible at nhs.uk/staywell. Children up to year 7 can get the free nasal spray at school or through their GP if they are below school age. If you are not eligible for the free vaccine, you can pay for it at your local pharmacy. The flu vaccination does not give you flu. It reduces the risk of catching flu, as well as spreading it to others. If you had the vaccination in the past, that will not protect you as the flu strain changes every year, so you need to have a new one this year. It is also important to wash your hands often with warm water and soap. Use tissues when you cough or sneeze, and bin used tissues as quickly as possible. Thank you for helping to protect yourself and loved ones this winter.